I'm Dr. Weisslogel, and this is a little introductory talk, really, on Plato's so-called theory of forms. So it's very famous. You could look it up. You'll see discussions of it in your textbook. But let's try to figure out what Plato had in mind with this theory of forms. Now, so there is no one place where Plato wrote down, okay, look, here's my theory of forms, whatever those are. It's derived by scholars who have read a lot of Plato's dialogues, have seen the different times that he's talked about the issues that we're going to discuss here, and have kind of pulled it together into a cohesive explanation of the topics that Plato has in mind. So let's take a look at what he means by this. What Plato's trying to convey with his theory of forms is a sort of a condensed summary of his metaphysical view, his view of the basic nature or underlying structure of reality, and his epistemology, his understanding of what it means to know something, what makes true claims true, what is knowledge all about. So both metaphysics and epistemology are addressed by Plato's theory of forms. So what's a theory at all? A theory is supposed to help us understand something. If you trace this word theoria, a Greek word, where we get our English word theory all the way back, you will find it's related to an idea of seeing, not seeing with your eyes, but when you understand something, you finally get it, you say, oh, yeah, I see. All right, so it's a theory to help us see something. So the theory of gravity is meant to help us see why when we drop something, it falls to the ground and doesn't fly away in the air. Or Darwin's theory of evolution helps us see why there's so darn many species out there. Well, Plato's theory was an attempt to address some questions too, help us see some things. Two things, as a matter of fact. First of all, what is it that makes a thing the thing that it is? That's not a question most people ask themselves, but as we've seen, philosophers are those people who wonder about a lot of things. So there's so many different things. What is it that makes a thing, anything, one kind of a thing and rather than another kind of thing? What is it that makes it what it is? And the second question is, how does anyone ever learn anything? Humans learn. You and I have learned lots of stuff in the course of our lives. How did that happen exactly? And Plato thinks that he's able to give an account of both what makes a thing the kind of thing that it is and how is it that human beings learn things in one theory. One account answers both questions. So let's take the second one first. So here's an example. I'm going to assume that we all know what a cat is. Okay, we all know what a cat is. I think we feel pretty good. If somebody showed us an object, we'd be able to tell pretty quickly that's a cat, or that's not a cat. That's pretty easy. Well, okay. So what is it that makes this thing a cat? I mean, what exactly makes it a cat and not something else? Well, we probably never really thought about that. And how did we learn that this thing's a cat and not something else? What is it that we know when we know that this is a cat? What exactly is it that we're knowing when we know, hey, that's a cat? What is that? Well, let's see if we could find out. How do we learn anything? Well, probably something like this. We probably all learn things the same way when we were little. We saw something and we looked at it. We're just tiny little children, maybe no more than infants. And we look at something, we don't know what it is. We have a puzzled look on our face, and our moms or dads or whoever, they pointed at it and they said, that's a cat. That's probably the first thing that happened to all of us. We don't know what things are when we're born. So, okay, they point at it and they say, that's a cat. And you want to learn, so you try to repeat it. You probably said something like, well, you're little, you can't speak too well, right? But you tried to say it. You got a pat on the head. Yes, that's very good. It's a cat. Very good, very good. And then the next day you see it again. You look it over. You go, yeah, that's a thing I saw yesterday. That's a cat. All right, good for you. But then you see something like that. That's not what you saw yesterday and the day before that. This is something new. And you look at it kind of puzzled maybe, and your parents or whoever pointed at it again, say, that's another cat. And you start trying to figure it out. All right, well, there's something about this and that other thing, even though they're not identical, they have something in common. Well, what is it? What is that thing, right? They say, well, it's a cat. Well, what is it that you're starting to learn when you see these two different things? Okay. And then next day, maybe you're out for a walk in the park with your parents or whatever. You see another four-legged furry thing with a tail. You look it over. You go, yeah, four-legged furry thing with a tail. That must be a cat. But actually, that's what you're looking at. And your parents say, no, that's a dog. And you say, in your little tiny mind, you're thinking, what is that? So what happened? They probably worked with you. They showed you lots of different pictures of cats and lots of different cats, and some of them are real cats, and some are pictures of cats, and photographs of cats, and drawings of cats, and caricatures of cats. Fast forward to today, and what? Cats. Even though none of those things look exactly alike, don't even have the same number of dimensions, some of them. How did you learn that? Well, Plato says that what you're doing when you learn to identify cats is getting clear about what he called the form or the idea of a cat. Call it, catness, or the catosity of the thing, or the catitude, let's call it for the heck of it. You're starting to grasp this form or this idea of a cat. And the form, is not, don't be confused, it's not just the shape of the cat, because all those cats look different in their shapes. You couldn't draw a chalk line around the outside of them and get the same shape every time. No, something more than that constitutes the idea or the form of the cat. It's the form that makes that thing the thing that it is. And each of the things that you're shown, share, or as we say in philosophy, participate, the form, catitude, or catness, or catosity, whatever we want to call it. Each one of those things has it. But none of those things has that form all by itself, in its entirety. No one cat has the entirety of catness. Why? Well, it's a good thing, because if there were only one thing in the world that had that form, if that thing died or otherwise disappeared, so would the form. But that's not what happens. Cats come and go. The form catness is participated by all cats millions of years ago, if there were any, millions of years in the future, if there's going to be any. All of them participate in that form cat. So raises a question, well, where exactly is that form? If it's not in any one particular cat, no one cat perfectly exemplifies the form catness. Where is it? How are they participating in it? Well, it really can't be in this world of visible things, right? And I could prove that pretty easily to you, because, think about the form dinosauriness. That's a word, not really. The form of dinosaurs still exists, because if you were to leave your house in the morning and come across some giant green scaly thing with huge back legs and tiny little front legs and a giant head with big teeth, you'd know right away, I'm looking at a T-Rex. I'm looking at a dinosaur. Even though no actual dinosaurs exist, we still have the form. We still know the form dinosaur. So if we ever did encounter a dinosaur, we'd know it because we have that form. So if the form isn't really in the things of this world, in its entirety anyway, and yet you can recognize it, you have the form, Plato makes a kind of an interesting inference from this fact. The only way that you could have these eternal forms that never go away, even though the individual things that participate, the forms might come and go, might be born, might die, the form is eternal. If we have these eternal things and we couldn't have gotten them from this life that we're living now, we must have already had them before we got here. And if we already had them before we got here, if that makes any sense, that means we in some way existed before we got here in this world. So Plato makes kind of an interesting argument. From the fact that you know anything, he infers you must have an immortal soul. Think about that for a second. From the fact that you know anything, you must have an immortal soul. Hey, Plato, do you think we have immortal souls? Well, I think you are an immortal soul. Well, why do you think that? Well, do you know anything? Let's start from that. The fact that you know something means you have access to something eternal and unchanging. That means there must be something about you that's eternal and unchanging, at least according to Plato. At least that's what he argues. Maybe a lot to swallow. For Plato, then, learning is a kind of recollection because it raises this question. If we have forms, and that's the thing we know when we know things, if we have them before we're born, why don't we just hop into this world naming things right away? Oh, look, there's cats, there's dogs, there's trees. We don't do that. We don't think little infant children know anything. We feel like we have to learn everything. Well, how come we forgot those forms when we're born, right? What caused that? And Plato says, well, it was the trauma of birth. I don't know if you've ever been around someone giving birth to a baby, but there's a lot of excitement when that happens. There's a lot of tension, a lot of trauma, a lot of chaos, people running around. It's very exciting. And Plato thought that your soul, your immortal soul, your immaterial immortal soul, when, for whatever reason, gets scrunched down into this material little tiny body and limited in that way, in all that trauma, all the forms kind of get whipped up as if they were put into a blender and you hit frappe. Right? They all got jumbled around. And so what happens is after this trauma, when you're born and you're starting to grow up, what you're doing is sorting out what it is you already knew and already know, says Plato. How about that? You're spending your life sorting out what's already in there. You might have heard of this pedagogical technique called the Socratic method. It used to be done in law schools all the time, where the professor comes in and never lectures, doesn't kind of do what I'm doing now, but just starts asking students questions. Never telling the student, but asking questions to elicit, to pull out of them. Even the word educate means to lead out of what's already in the student's soul. And Plato thought you couldn't really teach somebody something new, like totally new, absolutely new. It had to be in there already in order for any knowledge to happen in the first place. Now, that's the opposite of our modern view of the tabula rasa or blank slate idea, that what happens is when we're born, we are a whiteboard, completely empty. And education is a process of other people and our experiences writing on our whiteboard until we have a lot written on it and we say, oh, we're very knowledgeable. Plato thought that's impossible. If you were born empty, no way you wouldn't stay empty, according to him. Again, worth a consideration anyway. All right, so forms are ideas. The form, again, is not the shape of a thing. It's not just the visual feature of something. The form is the idea of the thing. It's what the thing is. But the form is also the ideal of a thing. In other words, the form indicates for any given thing how it's best for that kind of thing to be. So, for instance, if I showed you my old cat, Bagheera, Bags we call him. If I showed you him, you would immediately know two things. One, that's a cat. And two, that's not much of a cat. This Bags is old, he had a big hump on his hip, and he's missing one of his fangs. He's an old cat. He's not everything that a cat might be, but you know that because you know the form catitude, catness. You know what cats are like, and you could see from that how far off my cat happens to miss the mark. As great as he is, he's not perfect. Same with the rest of us. So what Plato is arguing here is that when we know what a thing is really, not when we're confused about it or still in ignorance about it, but if we truly knew what a thing is really, we would immediately know how it is best for a thing to be. Right? And that's what allows us to make judgments. You see a car, you know right away, that's a car, that's a great car, that's not a good car. You can make those judgments because you have the idea or the form of the thing within you. You know it. For Plato, the most real thing is the form. Most real thing is the form. Not this or that cat, but catness. Why is that? Because the things of this world are less real than the forms they participate in, because the forms are eternal and unchanging. Why is that good? What makes the eternal and unchanging things better? Because perfection doesn't need to change. Only the imperfect needs to change. It could get better. In fact, could get worse as well. So for Plato, what's really real, the realest of the real, is the forms. Catness, or in our case, humanity. the form that we participate. Each individual person is somehow less than the form, humanity, which we participate. Another way of putting it is, none of us is perfect. None of us is the ideal or perfect human being. So for Plato, he's got this idea that there's levels, a hierarchy of reality. The more eternal and unchanging the thing is, the more reality it has. So take this graphic here. Look at the lowest level of this, like a picture of a bed. How easy is it to destroy a picture of a bed? Simple. Tear it up, light it with a match, the picture's gone. If it's a digital picture, you just hit delete. It's gone. A bed, an actual bed that you could sleep in, has more reality for Plato because it's more enduring. It's more long-lasting. It's not perfectly long-lasting because, first of all, it wasn't always here. The bed you sleep in didn't always exist. It came into existence at a certain point. And it's possible someday it will go back out of existence. But to set fire, destroy a bed, it's going to take a while for that bed to be gone. So it has more reality than a mere picture or photograph or a painting of a bed. But more enduring than that is the very word bed, the very definition of bed, right? Saying in so many words what a bed is, because take a different example. Take nuclear weapons. Suppose we got rid of every nuclear weapon in the world. That'd be a great thing, in my opinion. It'd be fantastic. But will we have gotten rid of nuclear weapons? Well, think a minute before you answer, because even though each actual nuclear weapon may have been destroyed, the idea, the instructions for making them, the knowledge for making them still exists. But Plato thought there's one higher step than that, and that's the very form of a thing, in this case, bedness. Because we have different languages, we have different descriptions, and in some ways, there's no perfect verbal or intellectual description, conceptual description of a bed or a shirt. Try that sometime. Try to define shirt in such a way that you can get every shirt that exists into your description, but don't get anything else that isn't a shirt in your description. Just try it, just for fun sometime. Okay, it's not as easy as it sounds. But the form, bed or shirt or even nuclear weapon, the form cannot be extinguished, cannot be gotten rid of. It is, even if all the human beings were to disappear, still the forms would exist. So for Plato, those are the most real. So there's many things, all kinds of different beds or shirts or cats or human beings, but each one of those has one form. It's the unity that pulls together the diversity. In Plato's big dialogue, The Republic, he gives another description of a concept he has that's akin to this theory of forms. It's known as the divided line. My picture is not perfect because the ratios are not equal, as you'd see if you'd read this passage of The Republic. But again, there's this idea that when you move from left to right of this graphic, the reality of the thing is increasing. The likenesses of things that are a function of the imagination, paintings of beds, let's say, they're visible, but they don't have much reality. Then there's the things that those paintings or photographs represent, the bed or the shirt. Those things have more reality. And then there's the conceptual knowledge of those kind of things. That's where our sciences come from. More exact, organized bodies of knowledge about the different things of the world. And then finally, the forms, the highest forms. And that we somehow are intellectually able to grasp by what Plato calls dialectic, and we'll talk about that later. So the divided line and Plato's theory of forms are related. One last piece we're not going to talk about today is Plato's allegory of the cave, also found in his big dialogue, The Republic, but we'll talk about that in a different lecture. So, to summarize, the theory of forms is Plato's metaphysics, and I should also say epistemology. It's what makes things the things that they are and how we know those things. So what we are, according to Plato, because of our form that we participate, is humanity. Knowing that form tells us how it's best for us to be. So we can also see that metaphysics and ethics, being and the good, are intimately connected, according to Plato's philosophy. Being and the good are connected. Keep that in mind. As we move along, we'll see in more modern philosophy that link, that intimate link between being and the good, is going to be severed in modern thought forms. And we'll see what the implications of that are later on.